think I was about 15, and I was over in Dubrovnik, Yugoslavia at the time, and invited to a concert in one of these gorgeous old castles there. And I was almost as close as you and I are now. And Ivo Pogorelic sat down. I wasn't really that familiar with him. And he just sat down, and it was one of the most incredible things I had ever experienced, especially being so close to him and just observing it physically, but hearing how it was just popping out of the piano, and it was so vibrant. And that was a real turning point for me of, okay, I have to learn that piece. And then once I started learning that piece, then I had to learn another. And through the course of my life, it's been an addiction. I think I play Bach just about every day.
You mentioned addiction, and you mentioned this gateway drug of a piece, A minor English suite. It often starts with one piece. It's not like, let me start loving all of Bach all at once. It's no, one thing grabbed me, or one thing grabbed you, and then now you're converted.
Yes.
Right. And you mentioned that Pogorelic's performance popped.
Yes.
I want to talk about pulse in Bach, because for me there's kind of two types of Bach pianists, those who groove and those who don't groove.
Right.
And I don't want to pass judgment. I belong more to the groove camp. Right. I think sometimes you hear artists maybe like Andras Schiff, who has a different concept of dance, and it's less of this sort of pulse-driven, groovy way of approaching beat-oriented Baroque music. It's more gestural and formal.
Absolutely.
I can tell you're on the groove side of things. Can you talk about the importance of pulse, what it means to you as a Bach player, and also just in piano playing in general? It's not just Bach's music, but the importance of pulse, the importance of groove in music making.
You know, I think it's just more pronounced in Bach, the concept of pulse, but you know, like I say and like I feel truly, pulse is as important to music making as our heartbeat is to our being alive. You know, it really is. And you have to, just like we do with our heartbeat, you have to breathe within pulse. But if you have the structure, the foundation of pulse, you have so many options of how within these big beats, how you can slightly alter pulse, but still end up in the same place in a big way over big beats.
The big beats fall right in the pocket, but what happens in the middle might ebb and flow a little.
Absolutely, and I think it has to, because you know, we're human. We're human. We're not machines, and we need to breathe in between sentences. It's just like when we're speaking, right?
Could you show an example of this sort of pulse-driven way of approaching Bach, where the bigger pulses kind of fall almost metronomically, perhaps, right where they sound like they should, but on the inside there's...
Yeah, let me try and give an example from the C minor Bach partita. All right, the So very subtly, I'm stretching out the pulse between eighth notes once in a while, but in the bigger, longer line, I'm doing nothing to alter the pulse. I'm just letting it ebb and flow a little bit, breathe a little bit, if that makes sense.
It does, and it feels almost like the music is filled with little cycling gears of different sizes almost, and they're all adding up to one bigger machine, and yet you say it can't be machine, like it can't be mechanical.
Right.
But there is an aspect or an influence from the world of machinery, isn't there, in terms of clock time? We have to, on some level, respect clock time.
Right.
It can't be so flexible that we're amoebas.
Right.
So where for you is that sweet spot of the show, having the human side shine through while also mastering the mechanics of the instrument?
Well, I mean, a lot of it comes back to what this incredible Russian pedagogue, my sister's violin teacher when I was a teenager, Raphael Brunstein. I almost worked with him more than I ever worked with any piano teacher. And he always talked about this concept of the greater your discipline, the greater freedom that you have with that. One of my great pianistic idols is Art Tatum. You know, and you listen to what he's laying down with his left hand, right? This stride bass and the freedom of the right hand. I mean, ideally, what we have in playing Bach with pulse is an inevitability about the pulse, right? But that people aren't aware that the pulse is so strong. What they're aware of is that, like you said, okay, the music is grooving, it's popping, it has a vibrancy to it, right? And that comes through a lot of different things, obviously articulation and all of this, but very much of having this baseline pulse that is unchangeable, and within that, then you have variety.
And the right hand can be free and flexible
Yes.
over top of the left hand.
Yes.
Perhaps it is something that we understand better when we get older, because when we're younger, discipline means the opposite
Yes.
of freedom. So it's an interesting paradox of music making, isn't it?
It really is. And, you know, I had a piano teacher, Dalmo Carrà, wonderful Italian piano teacher, when I was like 11, 12 years old. He made me put a fingering on every single note, even slow movements, the simplest of slow movements. You know, if I was playing... he would make me put a fingering on every single one of these notes. It drove me crazy. But I did it because I was obedient, and gosh, it was liberating. Going through that for a number of years. Now I don't put a fingering on anything unless I discover some revelation of a fingering that I'm worried I'll forget in 2 years, then I'll put it in the score. But in general, it became so innate. Fingering, which is so important to piano playing, choosing fingering well.
Is rubato a term you use when describing Bach's music or your approach to Bach?
Definitely, definitely. There is a lot of rubato. In Bach, it's certainly not as evident as in Rachmaninoff or Chopin or Liszt. It's more refined, rubato. But I think all music needs this flexibility to it, right? It's not hard and solid. There's a fluidity, there's a sensuousness to music making that always needs to exist, whether you're playing Bach, even if you're playing Czerny. I think that always has to be an element of it, because this is an aesthetic art form. More than the word rubato, I would use the word freedom. You listen to somebody like Alfred Cortot, who I worshipped when I was younger. I still do, but you listen to his sense of rubato, and it's organic to what he's playing. It's organic to the architecture of what he's playing, right? So it's not self-imposed. Rubato shouldn't be about, look at me, now I'm going to take time here. Rubato should feel inevitable. Like, of course, this part of the phrase needs, just like when I was demonstrating, you know, like the saraband of the A minor. Mm-hmm. Here's an example. This isn't necessarily rubato, but it's not rubato. Mm-hmm. Okay, so. That's not metronomic. I'm taking tiniest little bits of time. I remember years ago having a wonderful conversation with one of my idols, Leon Fleischer, and we were talking about rests and fermatas in Haydn, right? And he said the fermata, the silence in music, is as important, sometimes more important, than the surrounding music. And that the music in your inner ear, the music is still going through the fermata. And he was saying, you should only play after a fermata at that last possible second, when maybe the listener's just wondering, oh, then you play, right? So you've really made the greatest art out of the silence.
You mentioned Haydn. I sometimes associate you, because I've heard recordings that overwhelmed me, with Haydn and Mozart. Your recordings of the Mozart Concerti, the Haydn C major, the later C major sonata. It's classical repertoire. It's close enough to the Baroque that there are technical and musical similarities with how we approach the music, but it's a century or a century and a half apart from a composer like Prokofiev.
Yes.
And yet there's a similar kind of clarity and even classicism in Prokofiev's music. You've recorded all the Prokofiev sonatas.
I have.
Do you see parallels between this generational divide of the 18th century and the early 20th century of Prokofiev?
Absolutely, I do. You mentioned a very important word to me, clarity, the importance of every note, every harmonic shift, right? Obviously, the gigantic abyss of, in Bach's scores, we don't have dynamics. Prokofiev's demanding quadruple forte, marcatissimo, feroce accents on every note. He demands the extreme, I think because he was working with the more modern day, this incredible instrument that we get to play. But all of the elements of the importance of the clarity, the speaking, the intensity of every note and every inner voice. Prokofiev has this great expression that he said himself, or a quote. He said he never wrote a melody that he didn't strangle the throat of. And it's true. You're playing this gorgeous Prokofiev melody, all of a sudden there's like a wrong note in there. And he couldn't help it. But very often, I program Bach and Prokofiev together because I think they're so complementary. And in fact, back to that Ivo Pogorelic story from when I was a teenager. After he finished this, and then the next work on the program, and that relationship makes sense to me, right?
Was that your first experience with Prokofiev as well?
It was.
So you had a lot of firsts that evening.
I had a lot of firsts that evening, but I also feel like I had a very personal journey in my relationship to discovering music. I had a great friend when I was like 16, 17 years old. He exposed me to a lot of these old historic recordings. And I hadn't really listened to that many recordings before that time. And it was illuminating, and I encourage every young pianist or musician, listen to some of these old historic recordings. Listen and listen and listen and listen, right? And
you mentioned Cortot. Could you?
Of course.
Who else were you listening to at the time?
Joseph Hoffman, of course Horowitz and Rubinstein. But I mean, I feel like I'm always discovering qualities in so many different pianists playing that I admire. Sometimes that I aspire to, and sometimes that I don't aspire to. One of my dearest friends in the world is the wonderful French pianist Jean-Flamme Bavuzet, and he and I have talked about music together for like 25 years, and we have some very different opinions, and as it should be. If we all just wanted to go out to dinner every night and eat a steak and a baked potato, the poor chefs would have no creativity. How boring would life be, right? Music is meant to stimulate and provoke, and we're meant as musicians to evolve, to constantly grow. It's like so many colleagues, you say, oh, I heard your recording from 10 years ago, and if somebody said that to me, I'd be like, I never listened to that again after the final edit. No, thank you. Like, I can't go back and listen to my recordings because that was then, this is now.
Well, Mr. Bavuzet is also a distinguished tonebase artist. Would you be willing to divulge some of your disagreements?
All right, the one place I'll go with that, all right, is I'm a huge Shostakovich fan. Jean-Flamme is not. And so
but he's a Prokofiev guy.
Oh, he is. Is he ever? Are you kidding? Incredible Prokofiev player. So that's just one area of many where we'll have... It's taste. Yeah. I have good taste. I'm kidding. But back to this relationship between Bach and Prokofiev, because this was something that happened so naturally for me. I spent about 2.5 years just working on and touring with the complete Prokofiev sonatas and recording them, right? It was an obsession, as would have to be able to play the whole oeuvre. And when I knew my final concerts of the cycle were at Lincoln Center, and I was already thinking ahead, knowing myself well enough that, boy, I'm going to crash after this project. And so I decided just very naturally, okay, I give myself a few days rest. I immediately started learning Bach Goldberg variations. For me, that transition from Prokofiev back to the purity and complexity of Bach was transcendent. It was incredible. It was just what I needed.
And speaking of pulse and hypnotic music, I mean, the Goldberg variations typifies it. I'm assuming Gould was an influence, or are you one of the pianists who was not influenced by
Oh,
Gould?
you kidding? I mean, I'm a huge Gould fan, and it's even funny. I don't know how many of your viewers have ever read Glenn Gould's essay on Mozart and how horrible Mozart is. And I'm telling you, I read the essay. By the end of the essay, I believed him. It didn't last very long, but he was that convincing of a thinker. And his Goldberg variations, people always ask, what do you prefer, the old version, the first version, or the second version? I really can't say on any given day. They're just, what I think defines my obsession with his playing of that work is all you're aware of is the music. You're not aware of, I mean, that piece is crazy. I know you play it, I play it. The intricacy, it's very difficult. You're not aware of that. All you hear is the music, and that's the goal, to me, of being a musician, being a pianist, is we transcend. All it's about is illuminating the music. We're not the creators of this music. We're the recreators of this music, and our job is to hopefully bring our humanity to the music making and our imagination and who we are, without imposing ourselves on the music, that we should just be illuminating what the music is, right?
He's so compelling or convincing, as you said in his essay. That's what his Mozart performances, or any of his performances that are a little more radical,
yes,
or eccentric, that's what they are. Yes, at first you might be startled, but he plays pieces in a way that are compelling. Internally, they have their own logic to them. And by the end, it's like he's written an essay for you and given you an argument about why this is how the piece should sound. And you're like...
And that's what we should do. When I walk out on stage and I'm playing a work, my goal is not to tell the audience how to feel. My goal is to make them just have open ears, open heart, and to feel whatever you're going to feel. I can love the Bach Second English Suite, and other people cannot like it. That's fine. But just allow yourself. My job is to bring listeners into my understanding and my love of the repertoire that I play.
You mentioned one of the great American pianists who recently passed, Leon Fleischer.
Yes.
Another great American pianist was John Browning. You had the privilege to study with him.
You know, I did. I was so blessed. I think I played for John Browning when I was about 15 years old in a master class. And we hit it off. And I was very shy, very closed, and John wasn't. And so he offered to work with me. And for a couple of years, I would go to him and play for him. And I'll never forget, one of the first things I played for John was Prokofiev. I played the sarcasms. So I get up and I'm playing for him. You know, the opening is so dramatic. And I was going... He was getting so upset with me. He was like pushing on my shoulders. He was, no, it's not enough. He was really getting upset. Finally, I got so upset. You know, we all have a temper, that I finally went. Now, if you look at how I'm playing there, this is not traditional.
Show me again.
Okay, I'm doing this. I'm going.
Which finger is that? Can you show me?
The thumb and the third finger together, because nothing that I was going to do was going to make John happy. I was playing 5-2. Well, you're not going to get as much power as if you have two fingers backing each other up like a steel rod. And finally, John was happy. But, you know, in so many of these lessons with John, they'd go on for hours, and half the lesson I'd be beet red, blushing, because of things he'd be talking about, the sensuousness of music, or the power, or the drama, or the fire. And he had a huge impact on me of just opening myself up to push. What we do is never enough. We have to constantly keep opening up, exploring, right? And he just opened me up to that possibility. And ultimately, I went to the Manhattan School of Music prep. But then I went to the college, and I actually got thrown out, and it just wasn't the right time, right place for me.
Playing hooky.
Yeah. Playing hooky. Most of it was playing the piano, actually. I just wouldn't show up. What, I need to know theory? Come on. Ear training, my ear's good. So I was rebellious. And during that time, I decided to study jazz for a couple of years. And I listened to recordings nonstop. And I just experimented in a room, just me and the piano, because I was a very obedient student. You want me to play it that way? Yep, I'll play it that way. But I wasn't making the decisions. They weren't coming from my depths, my heart. And also physically, that we're all different physically at the piano, and I had to figure out how to play the piano myself, not be told. And so, it was a difficult journey, and I'm not saying I would recommend it to anybody, but I'm grateful for the path that I took, because it forced me to take on greater responsibility and ownership of what I was doing. And it forced me to work harder and to not only think about, what am I doing when I'm practicing the piano? What am I doing here? How am I nurturing this? And for me, that was inspired by an incredible Joseph Horowitz book, Conversations with Arau, where Arau talks about his relationship with the psychotherapist Carl Jung, and then through Carl Jung, looking at archetypes, starting to look at Eastern philosophy principles. And that's how I spent my 20s, was just reading everything I could get my hands on of Carl Jung and then of Eastern philosophy. And it was, for me personally, that was what I needed to be doing.
So do you carry that sense of Zen, I suppose, with you
I do.
At the instrument?
I do.
How does it manifest itself?
Well, when I was like 18 years old, you get up and you play a concert, and sometimes you're in this great, perfect frame of mind to be playing the concert, and other times you're thinking about the cheeseburger later, right? So I hated that. What can I do to help train my mind more? And there's so many Zen concepts. One of them is just having an empty mind. Now, that's not easy to get to, a place of empty mind. For anybody who's ever tried meditating, it's almost scary. The synapses are bzz, 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 bzz,
Especially
right?
in this world.
Especially in this world, right? So how do you get to that place of having an empty mind, having a non-judgmental mind? Because we sometimes defeat ourselves by judging ourselves as we're playing. Why are we playing music? Because we love the music, right? Of course we want it to be as perfect or as ideal as it can be. But so it's both being fully present in the moment, not worrying about the previous phrase, not worrying about the upcoming phrase, because I'm trusting that I've put the work in, that I've been so disciplined that now on stage, I can be free. I can trust myself. It's both this kind of conflict between being fully involved and having a little bit of separation. Because my nature, I'm intense, is that I'll be so fully involved, I don't have any perspective. So I always think of it as just like a little bit of cushion between myself and what I'm doing.
Almost like you're floating above yourself.
A little bit.
Watching yourself doing what you're doing, and yet still being
fully present.
Fully present.
Yeah, exactly.
I see it physically too. I mean, the yogic stuff comes out in a kind of, you're very still, as was Arau at the instrument.
Yeah, he really was.
And the weight hangs.
Yes.
And your arms float. And yet there's so much power at the end of that because of that.
Yes.
How does it feel? What does it feel like physically?
Well, you just described it absolutely beautifully, actually. It feels you're using gravity. You're using, you want to have this solid structure, right? But then this fluidity of motion, right? Because again, if we're not taking advantage of our wrists and our elbows and using our elbow when we go up with a scale. Sometimes I'll see somebody, and what about your elbow? Help yourself. These fingers are weak, right? Just, it's organic. I don't love that word, but it's kind of just organically understanding how to use gravity and how to use your own flexibility within your body. Then, imagination, right? I talk about like feeling, if I want to play really soft, feeling like I have no bones in my hand. That's just a vision. It's a vision, but it helps me. If I want to play the opening of this, and I'm worrying about, this is some of the most sublime music that, like, if you died and went to heaven, this is what you want to hear. If I'm worrying about that, I'm going to suddenly be going, well, Leon Fleischer said the most beautiful thing about the opening of that Schubert B-flat sonata, the last Schubert sonata. He said, this music's already going in the universe. And then if I take that pressure off myself, the music's going, I'm joining. And just a limpid hand, suddenly you can get a color. That's not coming from some kind of technical approach. That's coming from having a vision of what I want the sound to be, and then your hands will obey. This is way more important than this.
It sounds more like eternity is unfolding. You're just joining it.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, you mentioned imagination. I could not have imagined a better way of spending an afternoon. Anne-Marie McDermott. Annie, thank you so much for your time.
Ben, this has been such a joy and just such a stimulating and fun conversation.
Let's do it again?
Let's do it again.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Thanks so much.